Hi, I'm Leon Lovelace, and this is Unstoppable Force. Now, I got a news story for you, and it's about Martin Luther King Jr., his legacy, and how our establishment really whitewashes the history behind Martin Luther King Jr., and also about just the civil rights movement in general. Now, it was Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday yesterday. So I watched one of Jamal Thomas's videos on it, and it was pretty good because he talked about how a lot of the politicians were being fucking hypocrites when they want to, give nice statements or try to just show physically or in some manner that they support Martin Luther King Jr. And then of course he talked about how, but whenever it comes to people that are doing the same things that King Jr. did back in the day, his contemporaries especially with Black Lives Matter, all those activists that are fighting for civil rights and equal protection and racial equality right now, how they want to slander them and they want to talk about how they're just rabble rousers and just showing that they're just playing identity politics. So it's pretty good. So you guys should check that out. But I want to talk to you guys about it in a different way, because a lot of us hear about, or we're taught about, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., about how he was peaceful and nonviolent whenever he did a lot of his protests. And so we've learned about that all throughout our childhood. But some of the things that they don't want to talk about is that the FBI and the other establishment and the government were going after him because they wanted to make sure that they could keep oppressing black people as much as they could. And they definitely don't want to teach anybody that they were doing all that they fucking could to make sure that they could keep their racist society in place. So I got an article from the Newsweek, and it goes on about it a little bit. I was just able to find a little bit about what the FBI did to him. And it was unconstitutional and racist and just very illegal and very unethical bullshit that was been going on. Because what the FBI did is, I'm trying to find a good starting point, but what they did was they illegally wiretapped him and invaded his privacy for years. Because it says, King was only 39 when he was killed on April 4th, 1968. Has spent 12 years, almost a third of his life, under the FBI's watch. In all that time, the Bureau and Director J. Edgar Hoover specifically never uncovered Communist Party ties or any nefarious behavior that warranted the years of wiretaps and eavesdropping. Instead, they discovered a man devoted to serving others, unafraid of self-examination, unconcerned with fame and notoriety, said David Garau. The FBI recordings have given us the most powerful, persuasive source of all for seeing how utterly selfless Martin Luther King was. Alright, that's his quote. Here's some more. You see him being intensely self-critical. King really and truly believed that he was there to be of service to others. This was not a man with any egomaniacal joy of being a famous person or being a leader. It's interesting. This says right here that it wasn't until 1963 when Attorney General Robert Kennedy approved wiretapping King's phones that the government ramped up its campaign against the civil rights activists. Alright, I'll skip down some. It says Kennedy's decision has lived in infamy ever since. In 2015, then FBI Director James Comey told The Guardian he kept Kennedy's approval of the wiretap order on his desk, a constant reminder of the Bureau's past misdeeds. He might have done that, but I still did a news story quite a while ago about how the FBI still racially investigates different groups based on race. So they still haven't really cleaned up their racist practices. So like all that good that did of trying to remind them not to usurp actually following the law. And then there's also a shameful letter that I think it was also, yeah, that FBI director at the time. He wrote a threatening letter to Dr. King. Let's see what it says. Because, of course, when you try to slander somebody and try to get them out of the public eye or shame them publicly, of course it's got to be about sex. Because they made up stories about, I'll start right here. This is from the New York Times. It's the unnamed author suggests intimate knowledge of his correspondent's sex life, including one possible lover by name and claiming to have specific evidence about others. Another passes hints of an audio tape accompanying the letter, apparently a recording of immoral conduct in action. Lend your sexually psychotic ear to the enclosure, the letter demands. It concludes with a deadline of 34 days before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is bared to the nation. There's only one thing left for you to do, the author warns vaguely in the final paragraph. You know what it is. When the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. received this letter nearly 50 years ago, he quietly informed friends that someone wanted him to kill himself, and he thought he knew who that someone was. Despite its half-baked prose, self-conscious amateurism, and other attempts at misdirection, King was certain the letter had come from the FBI. Its infamous director, J. Edgar Hoover, made no secret of his desire to see King discredited. Little more than a decade later, the Senate's Church Committee on Intelligence Overreach confirmed King's suspicion. And it goes on a little bit. And this is the most notorious and embarrassing example of Hoover's FBI run amok. Because of course they were breaking several laws when him or one of his associates wrote that letter trying to intimidate Dr. King. And this is over peaceful, nonviolent movements. Because, I mean, isn't that something? Dr. King wanted to push the society to make sure they treated black people just as equal as white people, while they want to spend their time trying to intimidate them and bully them and try to make sure they could keep oppressing black people. And of course, probably even more egregious about our black history and our civil rights history, that the establishment and the school system doesn't want to teach the children. Teach us when we were children, teach our children right now, or even when we're, almost adults, when we're in high school, 17, 18 years old. They don't want to teach us a goddamn thing about Malcolm X. Because even though his role in the civil rights movement might not have been quite as important as Martin Luther King Jr.'s, it was still pretty critical, especially at the time. So I found a couple articles, and while he was in prison, he converted to being a Muslim, and he became a preacher. So I'll start right here. After 6 years, Malcolm was released from prison. Later, he became the minister of Temple No. 7 Harlem. His indictments of racism and his advocacy of self-defense eliciting admiration, as well as fear, far beyond the New York black community. Whites were especially fearful, recoiling from his sustained pronouncements of crimes against his people. While most contrasted him with Martin Luther King Jr., with whose philosophy they were much more at ease, white college students found ugly truths in the searing rhetoric of condemnation. Malcolm, however, grew increasingly restive as the Nation of Islam failed to join in the mounting civil rights struggle, became convinced that Elijah Muhammad was lacking in sincerity, a view painfully validated by corruption at the highest level of the organization. So the threat of Malcolm X actually eliciting some sort of violence and saying, you know what, black people, we do need to arm ourselves and make sure we can fight back, was really critical, really important at that time. And of course, we're never taught about that. Not ever. They also don't want to talk about he was very strong with his black nationalism, and he really wanted, and you actually say he was a racist guy, because he really called just white people the devil because all the crimes of violence and discrimination that they really really embedded into this society that we have right now. Of course, it was way worse back then in the 50s and the 60s, where literally white people could just kill black people and not go to jail at all. And that was just the way they made sure that black people didn't protest their shitty position in society. And later on, it does go, well, this is kind of a biography, but they do go on about how later on he says, you know what, I'm not going to be a black nationalist and just hate white people for all the violence and all the hypocrisy that they spill out under their mouths all the time. So that is an interesting thing that I was able to find. And later on, because January is halfway over right now, so I should be able to do maybe a couple more videos in February about Black history and some more of the situations and some of the events that the establishment and our school systems do not teach us at all. Because a lot of this is really important, and there's a reason why they don't want to teach us this. And part of it's to kind of make society seem like it's okay and our society's pretty good how it is, and just not reveal to us how shitty and how awful and hypocritical it's been throughout our fucking lives, and how shitty it's been decades and decades ago.